WVEC TV, Hampton.
Time for what the flame is doing. Here we go.
This is Jeff Goodday, ABC News.
The first of the nation's presidential primaries was held this past week in New Hampshire. And while it was the first, it in no way will be the last. In fact, there are 36 more primaries to go. You would think with all of this activity, those in the media would have a field day. But at least one man, Time columnist Hugh Sidey, thinks the media, and especially television, is giving much too much attention to the election.
It seems to me that we've overdone, and particularly television, this election, these events, the Iowa caucus, and right now, or most recently, the New Hampshire primary. The concentration on what a few voters decide in these rather modest-sized states is blown all out of proportion. Like one of our correspondents, in commenting on the scene before the New Hampshire runoff, said it was really quite obscene, he thought. Hundreds, literally hundreds of news people in that small state, and all the folk heroes from television, Cronkite and Chancellor up there, and Jerry Brown wandering through paying homage to these great people, and each person talking to the other person. It's distorted.
I'm Jane Gardner. We'll talk politics with Time Magazine's veteran political reporter, and our own, this week on Focus. Here it is, barely March, and already this election year rivals Ringling Brothers as the biggest circus around. With some candidates announcing their intentions years in advance, running for president becomes a full-time job. Focus isn't sure it approves of all this running, but Focus is only a couple of years old, so maybe our attitude doesn't carry much weight. There's another news magazine with a national reputation for weightiness. So our John Miller asked Time Magazine's veteran political reporter, Hugh Sidey, what he thinks of the presidential race. He isn't too sure he approves either. Here it is, presidential politics as seen through the Sidey Eye.
It marches on week after week, chronicling American movements and malfunctions, debate and dependence, personalities and pontiffs. The covers of Time magazine tell us at a glance what kind of a week it's been, a week to contemplate a pretty face, or one of a crisis in a foreign land, or a crisis of confidence. But now we are in a political season, and we can chart the changing fortunes by glancing at the covers. In one bold picture, we see who's on top that week. It's a scorecard of the nation's fortunes. And inside is a column that puts it all in perspective. Simply titled The Presidency, it examines the office and the man. Hugh Sidey has been watching the Oval Office for nearly 3 decades. He's one of a handful of Americans who intimately know the office and the men who seek it. He has known the best and the brightest, the good times and bad.
We flew around the world in 1967 in 4.5 days. Lyndon Johnson used to be a marvelous traveler, and when he ran around the world, he would dispense his mementos, including plastic busts of himself that he'd had made up in 3 sizes. But in 1967, we went around the world. It started with a memorial service for Harold Holt, the Prime Minister of Australia, who drowned in the surf. And then Johnson thought it would be great just before Christmas to fly to see the Pope. So secretly, we headed the other way around to come home for Christmas. And we stopped in Pakistan and Vietnam and Thailand, and then on Christmas Eve, there we were circling over St. Peter's Square, 6 American helicopters. Thousands of people were down waiting for the Pope's blessing, and we had this huge fleet of airplanes that descended on them. We destroyed the vegetation in the Vatican garden, and Johnson ran up on Christmas Eve into the Pope's library and gave him one of those busts of himself. And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Frank Reynolds of ABC and I were the two pool reporters that were standing in the corner of the room, and we looked at each other. We still look at each other when we meet each other on the street and recall that incredible night.
Another incredible night happened last Tuesday. You read about it over coffee Wednesday morning in the newspaper. You'll read about it again next week in Time. It was, of course, the New Hampshire primary, the first time voters have expressed an opinion in the 1980 presidential sweepstakes. To read the paper, you'll find winners, not just Reagan and Carter. They won because they received the most votes. But you'll also see Kennedy saying he won because he didn't do as badly as expected. John Anderson and Howard Baker make the same argument. But for Hugh Sidey, what happened in New Hampshire was one more argument for those who claim the media distorts the news.
The media, particularly those of us who are in the electronic end of it, and that's you more than I am, actually, I just am on the edges of it, but I think the electronic part, television, has created more power here than I had ever realized. I used to scoff at those people who said, you people have a lot of power, and I don't think we did. We were the conduits more in those days, but suddenly we are. Suddenly we discover that electronics is involved in our government, in the use of power. Television personalities actually influence events. We've seen over the last months where the anchor men on the networks and anchor women have become part of our diplomacy.
Good evening. Now we wait. This is the anxious hour, nail-biting time for the candidates in the nation's first ballot box primary election. The polls are still open here in New Hampshire, and throughout this day, and it has been a beautiful day, the citizens of this politically hyperactive state have turned out in large numbers to cast their vote, to speak their piece.
It seems to me that we've overdone, and particularly television, this election, these events, the Iowa caucus, and right now, or most recently, the New Hampshire primary. The concentration on what a few voters decide in these rather modest-sized states is blown all out of proportion. One of our correspondents, in commenting on the scene before the New Hampshire runoff, said it was really quite obscene, he thought. Hundreds, literally hundreds of news people in that small state, and all the folk heroes from television, Cronkite and Chancellor up there, and Jerry Brown wandering through paying homage to these great people, and each person talking to the other person. It's distorted.
If the crush of cameras and media leads to distortion, Sidey says another problem with the way we receive our news is a problem of those who report not looking for issues, but for show business.
The media's lain fallow for 3 years, having nothing better to report than the natural debacles around the globe and government. You see, we don't report government very well. That's harder to do. The act of governing we don't report very well. So I say we're in grave danger of creating a perpetual campaign. These fellows that run are marvelous campaigners, but they can't run the country when they get in, and so they start to campaign immediately. We're in the same danger. It's very easy for the press to report politics. It's a lot of fun. You drift around the country, you stay in various motels, you have an affair or two out in Fargo or wherever it is, you drink with the boys every night, you live in good restaurants and good hotels, you're on the expense account, The candidates have the same sense of kind of euphoria. There are large crowds and they cheer and they walk around, they can say anything and they aren't held responsible for it. It's kind of a spectacle, they're away from their wife and kids. In some instances they enjoy that. And, it's a great adventure. It's become a sport, in essence, for media, for the candidates. And indeed, it kind of distorts the whole purpose, in my opinion, of politics.
Reporting wasn't the only bad job done in New Hampshire. Spelling isn't someone's strong suit. But when it comes to strength, Sidey says Carter is a master.
I would judge that probably Jimmy Carter has used the fortunes of that office, events, these crises, probably better than any politician I remember in or out of the White House, which he's orchestrated them for his benefit. Let's take it just a few days ago. Suddenly the Olympic hockey team wins, and there's this great surge of American spirit and pride, and you know, it comes right at the critical time. The Olympics are over, the hockey team is brought to the White House, and it should have been. And they have this marvelous, wonderful ceremony on the back porch of the White House the day before New Hampshire. You don't plan it that way. Presidents don't plan it that way. But presidents have such a broad view and such a long reach that they can look all over the globe every day and they can see events, if orchestrated, can help them. So I guess Mr. Carter has been very skillful at that. If the folk heroes of the media, the big stars of show business have a hand in it, and now the politicians are becoming that way. Can you tell me why not a single one of these candidates, the active ones now, is bald or fat or otherwise deformed? They all have even teeth and marvelous noses. My suggestion is that the reason is that television, again, demands this of these public figures.
Is that bad?
Probably, in the long run. We were analyzing the other day, some of us, what would have happened to George Washington. Rather stuffy, bad teeth, drinks too much, he'd have been lousy in today's world. Abraham Lincoln probably never would have made it. I mean, he told jokes, and probably some of them could have been considered ethnic. He'd have been ridden out. Plus, he had a funny voice. Theodore Roosevelt had a good set of teeth, but had a high, squeaky voice. Yes, I think it is. It does distort it. In some ways, it helps. Now, I won't argue that there are elements people do that do see. More people see the candidate and get some sense of him, yet those interested probably, many of them don't get as thorough an idea of what the man's about as we used to get 100 years ago.
Let me throw out some names and give me some thumbnail sketches. Jimmy Carter.
Well, Jimmy Carter is a better president right now than he was last month or last year. Oddly, I'm out of phase. I thought his first 3 years were terrible. He was inexperienced, arrogant, didn't understand what the world was all about or what leadership was. He was a great campaigner again, but not a good president. I think the Afghanistan invasion by the Soviets, plus the hostages held by Iran, plus inflation, plus his low polls, has shocked him through the summer and fall into a new reality. I don't think he's a changed person, but I think he's a bright person, and I think he began to learn. Suddenly the realities reasserted themselves in this world, and I think that he's a much better president, much more realistic president.
Teddy Kennedy.
Teddy Kennedy was reared in the old school. He's old-fashioned. He's an old-fashioned liberal who still dwells in that world of his brothers 20 years ago. Liberalism in that day, particularly the liberalism of wealthy young people, was a device. I mean, I think they had some compassion for the poor and underprivileged, there's no question of that, but they were statistics. They were points to be made in debate in the Senate floor. And then when it was over, you went off to Palm Beach and Palm Springs and Hyannisport, and you played touch football with your wealthy friends, and you had a big time. Teddy Kennedy still lives in that world. He's a man who's 47 years old and doesn't carry a wallet still. I mean, he doesn't live that life that normally we do. Well, Teddy Kennedy doesn't understand the middle class. Why would he? He's never had a salary. You know, he's never had to pay anything. Good God, what's that all to him? I mean, these people are people that simply get in his way because they argue with him about the bills that he wants to do. Now, his brothers got in, or Jack got in, on his labor reform bill. He had an issue. Teddy wanted to get in on health care, but somehow health care is out of phase. We're not sure we need it, at least not in the terms that he suggests. So Ted Kennedy lives in an old world of politics, that is, and he seems out of phase.
Jerry Brown.
Well, Jerry Brown, I think it's Mike Royko, the Chicago columnist, calls him Governor Moonbeam. That describes him better than anything I know. He lives in his own world. It's out in California. It's a mattress on the floor, you know. It's Jerry Brown talking transcendentalism or whatever it is, or Buddhism, and you know, he has marvelous ideas that perhaps would be great in a class on philosophy or something, but when you try to translate those into action, why, it's amazing.
Ronald Reagan.
Well, Mr. Reagan's an aging actor. Now, I grew up on Ronald Reagan. He was Dutch Reagan, the sportscaster in WHO Des Moines when I was a boy, and he was a marvelous sportscaster. He still is. That's about it. I don't say he doesn't have good ideas, and I think he's quite a bright man and quite a sensible man in some ways. But he lives, again, in a showbiz world. He went through the sportscasting phase and then into movies. And, you know, he's the Gipper. He's the fellow at Fort Ticonderoga, or whatever it is. And in California, that worked, obviously. That structure in the government, apparently set up by Pat Brown, the old Pat Brown. And then Reagan helped it also. He brought in good people, made it work, but then he could drift on and do his thing.
Where some is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day.
George Bush.
Well, George is the perennial preppy, as somebody said. Everybody in his family has nicknames. His brother is Pressy, and he's Poppy, and his wife is Barbie, and the dog is J. Fred, or something like that. He can't help it. He was born into that world. But George Bush is a dedicated man, good, sensible, even unexciting, perhaps even timid in some cases man. Yet he may have learned much in the campaign.
John Connally.
Well, old John may be the most effective man by all measures, could be, in the presidency, but he's the wheeler dealer. He isn't trusted. And I suggest it's more than the milk fund or his association with Nixon. I suggest that the primary factor probably is his change of parties, and then just how he looks. Some people say he looks presidential. No, he doesn't really in our way. My great compatriot James J. Kilpatrick says he looks more like a president than anybody. Well, I don't know what his idea of a president is, but I don't think he does. I think that he looks like that caricature of a Texan. You know, he has the jaw and the nose and all of it, and he's just too much. And I think that destroys him in the end.
Are there any of these men and the others we haven't mentioned that could be a good president?
They might all be good presidents. You see, this is one of the fallacies that we have in this business. I mean, once again, we're gauging them on what they do on television in 2 minutes, in 1 minute, in a debate in Iowa, a debate in New Hampshire.
This is an ABC News special. The 80 vote. The New Hampshire primary. Reporting from Manchester, New Hampshire, Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. Yes, the subject tonight is politics, because this is New Hampshire, and this is the date of the first in the nation ballot box primary, where voters actually have an opportunity to walk into the polling place and pick the candidate of their choice.
We were told of the vote totals Tuesday night, of winners and losers, too. It was the first of 37 presidential primaries and dozens of caucuses. It's all part of the nominating process, a process Sidey says needs to be revamped.
I think the way we choose our people is lousy, to be honest with you. It just seems to me that there are many good men in academia, finance, law, industry, banking, wherever you turn, who might be interested in politics if it wasn't such a grueling routine. If they didn't have to sacrifice family, their interests, their wealth, their reputation, their lives in some instances. And then this process of 37 primaries. As I say, now we're in an age of almost perpetual campaigning, when these fellows will start the instant they get into office to campaign for the next time. And those who want to get in will start sometimes 6 years ahead to plot, to prepare. And that gets it down to people with the wealth and the time and the family that will allow it. And that's a very narrow spectrum in our national life. And I'll also be honest that the people who are best at that may be worst at being president, in my opinion. And I think we must change this system. I think we've got to go back to the old system. Well, let's have the primaries, that's all right, but let's also have a provision if the party in convention does not like what they've come up with, that they can bring people in from the side door and shorten that dreadful routine that they have to go through. So I'd like to see a change. I'd like to see a change in emphasis again. I'd like to see it to be a little more serious. As I say, or maybe I didn't say, but this argument that was in the New Hampshire primary over who debated or who didn't debate or who should, you know, is preposterous. It has nothing to do with the act of governing. It is, you know, it's petty, childish, terrible display. You know, it's a plague on the whole Republican Party.
Mr. Green, you asked for me if you... I am paying for this microphone.
I was challenged by Governor Reagan to a one-on-one debate. I have been invited here as a guest of the Nashua newspaper. I will play by their rules.
Being president is fun. Not all the time, not 100%, but most of the time. I mean, these fellows wouldn't escape the problems were they private citizens. The same tensions would be there. If you're in the business of power, then indeed you want to be at the top. And they love it. Kennedy loved it. Ike liked it, despite his protests. Lyndon Johnson leaked it every pore when he was in there. He loved it so much. So they like it, and it is fun. And for us journalists to ride along and watch history like that, that's fun too. I like to say it beats working.
Our memories of things and places long gone are cloudy. One song describes memories as the color of misty water. That's not good enough for one Norfolk man. He's making sure a record of his city's past has been captured clearly in black and white. Judith Baroody talked with Caroll Walker, a man with a mission, a man taken by photographs.
He knew these times, Caroll Walker. They're as familiar to him as his old mandolin. He's been collecting scenes of historic Norfolk for over 40 years, a record of the city's past told in 1,000 photographs.
I'm interested in the past, the present, and the future. And it's interesting to know what went on before. It fascinates me to be able to go back over the years and see how people look. In other words, you look at a picture and you see those people, how they're looking at maybe the photographer taking a picture, but what were they doing? How much did they contribute to the city? Or what kind of an imprint did they leave on the city when they passed away?
Walker's pictures have historic value, not monetary worth. He keeps mostly copies.
I pick up the originals and I make a copy of it, so I'll have a negative. Then I turn the originals over to the library, but eventually they will get the whole thing.
In many cases, he says, the only existing photographs of an era would have been thrown away if people hadn't known about the Walker collection.
A photograph I have of Granby Street, that part of Granby Street on the north side of the Granby Street Bridge where the Lakewood lights are. That would have been thrown away if it had not been for a friend of mine who called me up one day and asked me, said she'd bought this old house, and in the old garage they'd found some papers and some pictures. They were pretty well affected by the elements because the garage leaked, and her husband was going to throw them away, but she said, no, let Caroll Walker, I'd like to take them to him.
Walker said he'd rather have that photo than 5 Michelangelos. But it's too late for many such treasures. Thousands have been destroyed, and some people may not care. But Caroll Walker takes his job as self-appointed guardian of Norfolk's past as seriously as he would a holy mission.
A man may describe what a street looked like. He may describe it very vividly, very colorfully in a book or in an article. But it's utterly and humanly impossible for you to envision in your mind just a picture that he has. There's no way in the world. He can use all the descriptive words in the English language. And he's still not going to convey to you the type of building was there.
Photos, like music, often express what cannot be spoken. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Caroll Walker says 10,000.
Next week, Focus stops off in the Parkview section of Portsmouth to look at what residents are doing to restore their neighborhood by renovating many of the area's lovely old Victorian homes. The renewal effort is more than a coordinated community development type facelift. It's a group of people fighting to keep their neighborhood alive. Join us when we explore Parkview on Focus next Saturday evening at 7.